Welcome to A Thought for the Week, a Torah in Motion podcast. I'm Jay Kelman, founding director of Torah Motion, and it's a pleasure to have you here with us.
This bonus episode of A Thought for the Week is sponsored anonymously by Tannenbaum Chat parents who are grateful to the rabbis and teachers' commitment to the education of the community.
Okay, welcome everybody. A pleasure to have you with us, and we hope over the next little while to just say some highlights of the Seder, the Haggadah, that hopefully will add inspiration and meaning and points of discussion at your Seder to be meaningful and peaceful for all of us. Okay, why don't we start at the beginning? That's where we normally are supposed to start. Pesach is the beginning of the Jewish people. It's that's when we became a nation. Pesach is the foundational story of the Jewish people, and it's at the Seder that we tell that story. Of course, when we tell a story, it's not just a story of the past. We're not recording historical details. All historians know that. The purpose of history is not just the study of the past. It's really more about the present and, in many ways, perhaps more importantly, a vision of the future. So we eat maror and matzah too to know what it's like to be a slave. And why is that important to know what it's like to be a slave? So we don't enslave other people. That we treat the stranger with love and respect. As the Torah tells us over and over and over again, the Talmud says 36 times. Tosfot claims maybe it's actually 44 times, depending on how you read the verses, that we should not oppress a stranger, mistreat them. We have to love them because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. So we have to know a little bit. We have to retell the story of our being slaves and thank God our redemption from that slavery. We gather together with our family, our community, welcoming all who are hungry in the present, all who are needy to come to our Seder. And then towards the end of the Seder, we welcome Eliyahu Hanafi as we look forward after the meal to the future, a future of a world at peace. And the Seder is the opportunity and the obligation to pass this message on to ourselves, our family, our community, and the world at large. We begin at Kiddush. Kiddush just means from the word Kadesh, holiness. And what does it mean to be holy? To be separate, to make it special. And that's how we begin all our special days, Shabbat and Yom Tovim, by an announcement. We declare today is very special. God has chosen us for a purpose, for a mission. And of course, on Pesach night, the Kiddush has a secondary function, and that is the first of the 4 cups of wine that we have to drink. Okay, after Kadesh, we come to Urchatz. We wash our hands. So like many customs and traditions that we have, there's always a practical reason, and then there's a symbolic, religious reason, however you want to describe it. So, of course, washing our hands is hygienic. And I'm sure that's one of the basic reasons we wash our hands. We know throughout history, even now to the ways you see, people don't take hygiene as importantly as they should, and as just a measure of cleanliness. But of course, in addition to that, we wash our hands because the Kohanim, the priests in the temple, used to wash their hands before they would eat truma, for example. And our sages turned our table into an altar. But the destruction of the temple, the temple moved, so to speak, the idea into our shuls and even into our homes. So this is true, of course, all year, and that's one of the reasons we pour salt on our challah, because every sacrifice had to have salt on it. But it's especially true on Pesach, which revolved around the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb. That used to be the focus of the Seder, obviously is no longer. And of course, that's why next year, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim is sort of a prominent theme in the Seder. And during the temple times, people used to wash. It's really still the law today, but it's just not followed. That you washed for all liquids, all vegetables dipped in liquid, which is what we're about to do for karpas. So we're washing because we're about to begin the meal, and we had to wash our hands. It had to do with purity and impurity. It's interesting that the Netziv, the great 19th century Rosh Yeshiva in Volozhin, says that's the basis of why many people have accustomed to wear a kittel. The kittel reminds us of the garments the priest used to wear, and it's sort of to bring us back into the mode and the mood of the temple. We wash our hands, now we eat karpas. So most likely, during the time of the temple, the karpas, which is a nice appetizer, you don't just begin a meal with the main course. You have the appetizers. That's what karpas was. And most likely the meal followed immediately afterwards. And we were washing for the karpas, and we were going to eat matzah right afterwards. And the reason they did that is because of the fear that if they set the Seder before the meal, they can go all night, as we're going to see, the 5 rabbis in Bnei Brak, and they're going to miss the time for eating the Paschal lamb. So it seems like they would eat the meal right away, and after the meal, they would then tell the story. It sounds to us very strange, but actually makes a lot of sense. And so we did urchas, karpas, and we're about to eat the food. Of course, the karpas turned, you can say, after the temple into a more negative food. And that's why we dip it in the salt water, reminding us of the tears, as we transfer, in a certain sense, from freedom to slavery. Pesach is, of course, from slavery to freedom, but in a sense, the karpas went from freedom to slavery. And that continues by yachatz. We break the middle matzah, because a poor person can't even have a whole piece of bread. He doesn't know. If he's lucky, he scrounges a few crumbs here and there. And even if he does have a whole piece, he hides it away because he doesn't know what's going to be for his next meal. And so that's, of course, our custom. We hide it, and later on that becomes the afikomen. Of course, we can only appreciate, as we sort of alluded to, appreciate freedom if we experience its lack. And this, of course, this theme we have throughout our traditions. That's why we fast on Yom Kippur, to know what it's like to be hungry. That's why the Talmud says the reward for a fast is charity. That's the most important reason to fast. Very nice to do tshuva and to come closer to God. The way we do that is through the mitzvah of tzedakah. We sit in a sukkah to know what it's like to be homeless, and we eat the matzah and the maror to try. It's hard. Thank God for most of us, it's hard. Unfortunately, not for all of us, but for most of it, it's hard to know what it's like to not have as much as we would like. Okay, Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpatz, Yachatz. Now we get to the main event, Magid. One of the important biblical mitzvot of the night, of course, we started the transmission of our story, of our mission, to everybody at the Seder, and perhaps even to ourselves, as we're going to see later. The Talmud says, you have a Seder by yourself, you have to ask yourself 4 questions. So we're talking to ourselves, we're talking to our families, we're talking to the world at large. People don't always listen, but we have to talk and try to teach as much as we can. We begin with Halach Manya. So it's interesting, Halach Manya and Haggadah are the only 2 parts of the Seder that are in Aramaic. The entire Seder is in Hebrew. Hebrew is the language of the Torah. It's the language of the land of Israel. And Aramaic is really the language of the exile, the Babylonian exile. And that's what the people spoke. The Seder is in Hebrew. That's the language of redemption. But we're in a dream world. But we begin the Seder by saying, you know what? That's very nice in theory, but we're here, we're slaves. Only next year we'll be free. And of course, we end the Seder with the Haggadah, the world. This one eats this one, a dog eat dog world, and the Haggadah representing of the Jewish people. And in the middle, I would say that we bracket the Seder with a dose of reality. We have to be cognizant of the real world. And then, of course, we go into a dream world of redemption and peace and all the beautiful things that we hope and pray that one day will happen. Manishtana, of course, the highlight of the Seder, I would say, especially for people with young children, perhaps even for many people who are not so observant, thank God. Many Jews, most Jews, still observe a Seder, even Jews who are very far from observance. Not everybody, of course. And Manishtana becomes the central point of the Seder, rightly or wrongly. I don't know if that's the right phrase, But it is very interesting, I think, for everybody. The Manishtana is sort of a highlight. But in the Talmud, it appears that Manishtana is really a second rate, if I can use that term. The Mishnah says the 10th chapter in Masechet, in the Tractate Pesachim, only the 10th chapter discusses the Seder night. It begins the first chapter, B'dikat Chametz, and then goes through the next morning and the day, etc. And then we come to the night, the last chapter, and it goes through the basic structure of the Seder was already existent in the time of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says we pour the second cup, Bechana ben Shoel. Then now the child asked, why does the child ask? Because what's going on here? Well, what are we having another cup of wine? And we have so, and then the Talmud, what he asked, the Talmud doesn't say because it doesn't matter. And then the Mishnah says, if the child doesn't know enough to ask, he doesn't know to ask. His father teaches him. And then the Mishnah lists off the questions which are not exactly the same as our questions. One of the questions dealt with the Paschal Lamb. So the Manishtana was a generic set of questions for those who didn't know how to ask. That seems to be the original. And the Talmud says, right afterwards, the Gemara says, two people having a Seder, one asks a question, says, now we don't have to say Manishtana. If you ask any question, that counts. It doesn't have to be Manishtana. Nonetheless, of course, we all know, no, we cannot have a Seder without Manishtana. The question is, of course, we all refer to Manishtana as the 4 questions. I don't know, maybe it's 1 question and 4 answers. Manishtana, halayla zeh, how is this night different? And we tell you there are 4 ways. This night is different. But we all know that's not how we interpret the question. The word ma, you mean how is this night different? That's the 4 answers. Or why? Why is this night different? And of course, that's the question. Because in Judaism, how is not enough. We always want to ask why. We try our best to understand the whys of the hows. So we start with the declaration. Wow, like, how is this night? I can say, why? But I'm saying it's an expression now. Look how different this night is. And then we ask the question, why? Why we eat chametz and matzah and maror and dipping and leaning? It's interesting just to point out 1 or 2 things. The difference between chametz and matzah, as we'll see soon between the Chacham and the Rasha, is very fine indeed. As a matter of fact, chametz and matzah are really the exact same thing by definition. By definition, the only thing that serves as matzah are ingredients, one of the grains that could turn into chametz. If it can't be chametz, it can't be matzah. Chametz and matzah are the exact same ingredients. The only difference, of course, is time. When you sit back and you let it rise, it turns into chametz. And if you bake it quickly, it becomes matzah. And of course, the message is clear and powerful that the definition of a free person is control of time. Are we masters of our time, or is time masters of us? And that is why the 10 Commandments, the Torah has 2 reasons we keep Shabbat. The second reason is because we were slaves in Egypt. A slave has no concept of time. Unfortunately, I would say we live in a society that today the line is so fine. We have many people who they wouldn't consider themselves slaves, of course. Some of them are extremely well off and live a life of luxury, but sometimes time controls them. And what I call voluntary slaves, people who can't go to parent-teacher night and can't take their kids to the soccer game and can't do this and are never home at night for supper because they're working. They're working very, very hard. What can you do? It is harsh sometimes, but that's why the Shabbat becomes so important. But slavery and freedom is not just an ancient concept. Unfortunately, real slavery is a modern concept, unfortunately, in parts of the world. But I think for most of us, the idea is that how we use our time. Okay, let's go to Avadim Hayinu. What kind of an answer is Avadim Hayinu? So, as I'm sure people all realize, the 4 questions are never really directly answered in the Seder. Of course, we want the people to think, be a discussion. The Seder is just a template. You can discuss many other things. But on the one hand, Avadim Hayinu serves as the basic answer. You know why we do everything? Because we were once slaves, and now we're free. And then you have to explain it. But it doesn't, as I mentioned, directly answer the question. But this story begins. That's how we would all begin the story, that we were once slaves in Egypt. and now we were free. Now, we say here that had God not taken us out of Egypt, anu, banenu, bnei banenu, us, our children, our grandchildren, mishubadima yunu leparo, we would be slaves enslaved to Paro. It's very hard to believe that is true. But we'd still be slaves to Paro. Egypt, it's not the same Egypt as it once was. All the upheavals in history, you can't say 3,500 years ago, be the same. So on the one level, of course, it's an exaggeration. That's our rabbis often exaggerate. People often exaggerate for good reason. It makes a point. But on the other hand, there's a lot of deep truth to this. We wouldn't have been slaves necessarily, but we wouldn't be here either. We would have been lost in Egypt. We would have assimilated had we not left. The rabbis express it that the Jewish people were on their 50 levels of impurity, and the Jewish people were on the 49th level. And had they one more, there becomes a point of no return. We had to leave immediately at that point. Doesn't necessarily mean we slaves would be lost to the people. Maybe that's the worst form of slavery on some level. And the truth of the matter is our rabbis do claim that 80% of the Jews did not leave Egypt, which in of itself is fascinating, which puts a different spin on what happened in Egypt. And we always think, they were throwing babies into the Nile. Already, I believe the Ramban notes that was only for a very short period of time, till Bat Paro discovered Moshe and convinced her father no more throwing Jewish babies in it. And the Netziv, other commentaries point out many Jews had a good life in Egypt. We remember the fish and the meat, and let's go back. How many times did Jewish people say in the desert, let's go back to Egypt? Nobody says, let's go back to Auschwitz, God forbid, right? So it wasn't so bad for many people. Maybe for some people it was very bad, and the spiritual situation was bad, but Jews didn't all leave. They liked it there on a certain level, and that's why they could want to go back. And those people were lost, and of course, that's been throughout Jewish history. That I always say, if the Jewish people are proof of Darwin, of survival of the fittest, that those Jews who have maintained their Judaism and passed it on from generation to generation, despite the pogroms and the persecution and the Holocaust, is amazing. It's amazing, and that has to be how we relate to all Jews. Everybody's welcome at the Seder. Anybody who identifies as a Jew in the post-Holocaust era, I think we have to take their hat off to them. So not everybody left Egypt. Most did not leave Egypt, but thank God those who did, and that's why we are here to tell the story. And then it continues, therefore we should tell the story at great length. Yodim et the Torah. We know everything. What's there to tell? So, of course, it's also an exaggeration. Even if we were talking to the greatest sages of the generation, an exaggeration. Obviously, at every Seder, this is an exaggeration. But the idea that there's always something to learn. Yeah, you've done the Seder 50 times, or if you live in America, outside of Israel, 100 times. Whatever it is, mitzvah aleinu l'saper b'yetziat Mitzrayim. And the more we talk, again, because we're not telling the story, it's the lessons of the story. What we can teach from the story, the better it is. So we begin this idea by proving it. We bring a story of 5 of the greatest rabbis. We're now living in just after the destruction of the temple. We're in Yavne, although these rabbis are in Bnei Brak, but this is the era. Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai gave up Jerusalem to make peace with the Romans. You leave us alone. Let us rebuild Judaism in Yavne. Had the Romans known what would have happened in Yavne, they would have never agreed. They obviously thought the Jewish people, that's it. We destroyed their temple. They're finished. They didn't realize that we can live without a temple, that the Torah is way beyond places and objects and things. And we recreated Judaism in Yavne under the leadership mainly of Rabban Gamliel, who was a very strong, powerful, too powerful at times, but necessary leader at that time. But yet he is, of course, missing from this story. He's the one sage you would for sure expect to be at this story. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon. This most likely took place during the time when he was impeached because he was too harsh on the people. Be that as it may, 5 rabbis are sitting in Bnei Brak, the home of Rabbi Akiva, who was the one who lived in Bnei Brak, and we're Misafrim b'Yitzim Mishram Kol Oto Halayla, all that night. So just to point out what I find very interesting in this story. There's lots of interesting things. We can't cover it all. Okto Halayla, that night. Okto Halayla. In the context of Rav Elazar ben Azariah, who was the one who was appointed the Nasi to replace Rabban Gamliel after he got impeached, although they reinstated Rabban Gamliel and they had co-leadership. But Rav Elazar ben Azariah, the Talmud says, Okto Hayom, on the day he was appointed. There's Oto Alayla here, and when he gets appointed, we're talking about Oto Yom, major changes happened. There was a total different philosophy of education. There was a transformation of the Beit Midrash went from an elitist institution under Rabban Gamliel to the Gemara says they had to bring in 700 benches. All the students who Rabban Gamliel wouldn't come in, and many other changes that he made. Many questions arose that day that were decided, but Oto Hayom, on that day of transformation. Of course, Oto Halayla, it was the day of the transformation of the Jewish people. I think that language, Oto and Oto, is not coincidental. They're up all night until their students come to tell them it's enough of the Seder. We'll leave that for you to discuss at your Seder, what that means. What I mean, they didn't know Shema. Why do they need to say Shema? If they're saying Yitzim Mitzrayim, that's even better than Shema. In other words, we say the third paragraph of the Shema in order to say Yitzim Mitzrayim, and even the first two paragraphs, the acceptance of the yoke of heaven. We'll leave that to discuss. But this sort of very interesting idea that the rabbis, their students, knocked on the door. Guys, time to go to shul. Rabbis, time to go to shul. And then the Gemara continues with the Gemara. The Haggadah continues. Rav Elazar ben Azariah, who was, according to the Gemara, 18 years old when he got appointed, and he aged overnight. And when you become a leader of the Jewish people, you age quickly. He's like 70 years. That's he grew. They wouldn't respect him. Whatever happened, he looked the part of the leader of the Jewish people, and obviously he was having a debate with the rabbis. You have to mention the Exodus at night, besides the Seder night, with other 364 days a year. And he was trying to convince the rabbis, and they wouldn't be convinced. And Ben Zoma, who the Gemara says the great Darshani, one of the great expounders of the Torah, says, yes, the word Kol Yemecha Yecha means the daytime. All the days of your life means at night. Interestingly enough, this, by the way, this is a quote from a Mishnah in Brachot, the first chapter in Brachot, which begins with the saying of the Shema. That's how the whole Mishnah, corpus of the Mishnah opens. So the Chachamim say no, the sages disagree and say, no, Kol Yemecha Yecha doesn't mean to say it at night. It only means this, that we will continue recounting the Exodus even in the Messianic era. I find this to be a fascinating debate. Basically, they're debating, are we going to mention Egypt in the Messianic era? And according to Ben Zoma, the answer is no. We're going to mention it at night. Why do we have to mention it when the Messianic era, when there's world peace? We don't have to mention it. Egypt will be a little nothing. We'll talk about the great redemption that will be in our time that we need. There's no point to mention it. We mention it at night, so hopefully the day will come. And the Chachamim say no. I would say you can never forget your past. I don't care how much greater a future redemption might be, but we must constantly remember Egypt. We have to mention Yitzim Mitzrayim, the Exodus, every day, but of course the expression, the Chachamim use lahavi, limon Mashiach, is a very strange expression. They could have said, Kol Yemecha Yecha means even in Yom Mashiach. I don't know exactly what the Hebrew would be, but the lahavi, to bring the Messianic era. It sounds like saying the Exodus every day, talking about Yitzim Mitzrayim. That's what will lahavi, that will bring the coming of the Mashiach. Obviously, saying doesn't mean saying. I mean, it means saying, but saying is not important. Saying in Judaism always means to do. Speech must motivate us. Yeah, for example, the Talmud says that God told Moshe, if you say the 13 attributes of mercy, Hashem, Hashem, Rachum, Mechanun, God will forgive us. Clearly, it doesn't mean we can come to Yom Kippur and say 50 times like we do the Yud Gimel Mitot, the 13 attributes. It means you have to do them. That's what Talmud say. Ma Hashem Rachum, the same way God is merciful, you have to be merciful. The same way God is patient, the same way is Chanun, gracious. Saying is to motivate us. So we talk about the Exodus every day, not to talk about the Exodus, to tell us why do we talk about the Exodus. So we mentioned already to be nice to strangers. I'll mention one more idea here. Of course, there are other ideas. And that comes from the parsha we'll read in a few weeks in Kedoshim, where the Torah tells us that you should have honest weights. Ephah tzedek, Hain tzedek, 5 times. Honest, 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 honest. I'm the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. But it says how to Manyan Shemitah Leitzil Har Sinai. What's it do with the price of tea in China? That honest weights because I took you out of Egypt. And Rashi just makes the comment, Almanat King. That's why God took us out of Egypt. Apparently, Egypt was not didn't have great business practice. The way they paid their workers and mispaid and treated people, right? Their business was not on the up and up. That's why we talk about the Exodus. When we talk about Yitzim Tzorah, we talk about how to treat strangers, how to be honest. So that's lahavi limot hamashiach. If by talking about mentioning the Exodus can inspire us to act, then we can bring the Mashiach. Only by God does speech lead to action. Vayomer Elohim, be'eser mamarot nivra olam, in 10 sayings of God. God's speech is action, but for man's speech has to lead to action. So that's the debate here. It really has nothing to do with the Seder night, but it follows on the previous story with Rabbi Elazar ben Zar, because everybody agrees, interestingly enough, the Seder night has to be only at night. That's why they woke them up. They said in the morning, let's go Shema. There's no point. The Seder ends. There's a ending time for the Seder, dawn of the next morning. So we said everybody should tell the story, and no matter how smart you are. But how do we tell that story? So it depends who's at your Seder. Is your Seder with little kids, with non-observant Jews, with community, with people you know? So who exactly you telling the story to will determine how you tell the story. And that, of course, is the point of the four children, the Arba Banim. I know everybody likes to translate the 4 children as the 4 sons. And probably in the context of the Haggadah, that is what it meant, because it was the sons who you transmitted Torah to, although I don't, maybe even that is not correct. But for sure today, it's the 4 children. It's just as important, maybe more important, that our daughters are learned, and they are the ones who transmit our tradition very much. Banim in the Torah sometimes means son, but usually means sons and daughters. Bnei Israel doesn't mean the boys of Israel. The Ber Bnei Israel, that means that Banim atem, your children to God, doesn't mean your sons to God. Anyway, be that as it may, the point is we have the Haggadah mentions 4 different typologies of people who may be at the Seder, and you have to adjust the story. Each one, it's going to be a long story, of course. Everybody has to find meaning. Now, why 4? Why 4? So it's interesting. Of course, what do you mean why 4? If there were 3, you'd say why 3? Well, there are 5, obviously. But of course, there has to be a reason. I mean, there doesn't have to be, but there is a reason why it would be 4 children. It is interesting to note that Adam, Noach, and Terach, sort of the forerunners of the Jewish people, obviously Adam, obviously Noach, and obviously Terach. They are the sort of the pre-Jewish people. They each had 3 children. Rivka and Abraham has 2 and then 6. But, he makes the 2 main children, he's 8 children altogether. And then Yitzchak and Rivka have 2 children. And Yaakov has 13 children, 12 sons and one daughter that we know of. And just this idea of 4 children, the only person I can think of who has 4 children in Tanakh or in the Torah is Aaron, who we tragically read just this past week. 2 of them died. But of course, the reason there are 4 children is because this teaching is really a rabbinic. They read the Torah very, very carefully. And they noted that there are 4 discussions between parents and children, where children ask their parents a question, actually 3 times. And the 4th time it says, and you should tell your child. That's a child who doesn't know how to ask. And then the Haggadah, in a really very, I would say, bold move, said that these are talking to 4 different children. It's not like we assume Torah is talking to everybody, every verse talking to everybody. If you take a look at this, no, this is really talking to the Chacham, and this is talking to the Rasha, the Tam, and the Sheino, the Shol. Each part is differently. Even more amazing, something just to point out, of course, is the rabbis really, at least by the Rasha, are totally reinterpreting the text of the Torah. If you look in the Chumash, in chapter 12 in Bo, and the Rasha is the first one, quote unquote. The verses of the Rasha are the first ones that appear in the Chumash. It says that when you come to the land of Israel, you should keep this avodah. The Torah describes the service we do Pesach night, and even when you come to the Israel, u'shmartem et avodah, so you should keep the service. And the next pasuk is Vayaki emru elechem b'nechem. When your children say Ma avodah zot lachem, what is the service? A great question. You have to do this. So your kid, that's great. Your 6-year-old kid is interested. But Martim Sevach, so you should tell him, God passed over our home. It was wonderful. We were saved. Nothing to do with the Rasha on surface. And yet the Haggadah transformed this question into the question of a Rasha, turning, in a sense, avodah, which in the context of the Chumash, and the context of our tradition, generally means service of God. And that's a good thing, to avodah, a burden. The avodah that Mitzrayim, that the Egyptians put, avodah is mentioned many times. So this is a beautiful idea that avodah can mean service of God, and it can mean hard, often backbreaking work. And of course, sometimes it can be the same thing. And for some people, it's avodah, and for some people, it's avodah. That we all know. Somebody can start a business, can work 20 hours a day, but he doesn't consider it a burden. He keeps Shabbos, all great. He doesn't, it's service. And that is probably the simple reason why the Haggadah doesn't quote the answer of the Torah to his question, because that's not a Rasha. So the Gemara, the Haggadah gives sort of a new interpretation. They quote a different answer. And what's very important to point out, and the way the Haggadah answers him, the Fisha Hotzi Atzmo Mina Klal, Kafar Bikar. Since he removed himself from the community, he denied the basics of Judaism. This is such a powerful idea. The definition of a heretic here, not to believe in God, don't believe in God, do mitzvot. It's, do you associate with the community at large? Rav Soloveitchik developed this theme often, and the Rambam picks up on this point, and the Rambam actually writes in Hilchot Tshuva that a pious Jew who doesn't sin, but doesn't participate in the community, doesn't feel their sorrow or rejoice with the community, actually loses his share in the world to come. Very powerful Rambam, clearly based on the Haggadah, that the Fisha Hotzi Atzmo Niklal, as long as a Jew is attached to the community, he can be totally not religious, but he feels part of the community. He joins in. He comes to Pesach Seder. That Jew is somebody we have to welcome and embrace and try to teach. But clearly the Haggadah is sort of, this is a major drush on the Torah. One other point that I'll mention in this context is his answers changed and the Chacham's answer has changed. What are all these laws? And the Torah gives an answer. That's the answer in the Torah, which we just said a few verses ago, a few stanzas ago. But that's not the answer that Haggadah gives. The answer gives don't eat after the Afikoh. A very strange answer. And Kehilchot Pesach, don't eat. So just one small thought: the idea of that Jewish law, the imperative of Jewish law for the Chacham. The Chacham is Jewish law, the importance. Philosophy and law have to go together. Everything is very nice, and ideas and concepts and working together, beautiful. But we also have to observe law. It's not enough to have Jewish values without rooted in the law. And that's basically what we're telling the Chacham. But what I wanted to point out, the answer to the Chacham and the Rasha are different. The Tam and Sheinoya Daily Show, the simpler children, we just say what it says in the Torah. To bright people, and we assume the Rasha is bright, you can't, the questions are the same, but every generation has to give different answers. You can't say this is the way we did it in Europe, and this is how, and this is that. It doesn't work. And many, many people were turned off Judaism because we tried to give them the answers that weren't appropriate for their time and place. And I'm on a legal concept, the idea of, okay, I'll leave that out. Okay. So it's very important to know that every generation has its own challenges. The questions may be the same, but the answers differ. The Tam and the Shene, they're not on that level, so to speak. Just give them plain, simple things. That's, I think, a very important point. We can't give them complex answers. For many people, it does work. This is the way it was done in the past. This is the way we do it. We don't ask questions. Even though the Shene Dishul, one who can, could be one who's not interested, we usually interpret in a very negative way. And maybe this is also negative, but it could be a person who doesn't need to ask. He's very pious. There's no questions. I think that's unusual, and I don't think that's a positive thing. But be that as it may, for those people, we give them the answer we say in the Torah. Okay. One other point we can make, the Sheinoya Daily Shol, I would say that's the majority of the Jewish people, for sure, outside of Israel, even in Israel. And that's sad. In a sense, questions are always good, challenges are always good. At the same time, at petachlo, the aleph, the feminine, the softer approach, he's at the seder. The sheno and the shol, we should never give up. We can't give up on any Jew. And everybody is, well, yeah, and you tell him what happened, him or her, the sheno daily shol. And the tam also, by the way, can have a second meaning. We also always interpret tam as somebody who's very simple, and that's probably the primary interpretation. I think the Yerushalmi, where this second place, this midrash appears, calls him a tipei shaful. But tam can also have can mean pure. Yaakov was an ish tam. The Torah tells us tamim tiyeh she'im Hashem. We should be pure, wholesome with God. An innocent, wholesome, doesn't mazot. He's happy with simple ideas, but doesn't have to only be a sort of a negative connotation. Okay, so now we've figured out that we have to, pedagogically, we have to be very smart. We have to tell the Seder, and we have to teach Judaism, of course, all year in an appropriate way. And you have to know who people are. I will add one thing as I'm thinking. A very beautiful explanation. I'm sure many of you have heard it. This was first told to us many years ago as a teenager. I believe in our Pesach Seder. My parents, Salim Shalom. This was taught us by a very, very wealthy, successful business person who was very non-observant at the time. Later on, they actually became observant. Very beautiful. But he at the Seder just came up with the first time I had heard it, that of course all of us are all four of the children. We all have elements of all four, and you can say it even easily as we go through life. You're born 2, 3, 4 years old. You know your daily shul. You don't know what to ask. You know anything, or you enter first year university, some complicated course. You don't even know where to begin to ask. And then Tam is innocent. Children 8, 9, 10, they don't tell a lie. Children are so pure and innocent. And then as we become a teenager, become a Russia. I don't mean it Russian evil. I mean we rebel, and that's normal. That's normal. That's good. Even we challenge, and then hopefully we grow from being a Rasha to being a Chacham. We don't have to assume these are 4 different children. Okay, so after we discussed how we're going to tell the story, depending on who we're talking to, now we discuss when we tell the story. So the Haggadah says Yachom Rosh Chodesh. Maybe we can tell the story from Rosh Chodesh. It's a little bit of a strange question, right? Who thinks Pesach begins on Rosh Chodesh? But if you look in the Torah, it's not such a strange question. The Torah in Parshat Re'eh says, Shamor et Chodesh Aviv, Vasita Pesach. You should keep the month of the Aviv. Kiba Chodesh Aviv, Yatzatem Mitzrayim, because in the Chodesh Aviv, in the spring month, in the first month of the year, Aviv, Nisan, what we call Nisan today, we left Egypt. So, and then the Torah says, and bring the Korban Pesach, never says a date. So apparently the month of Nisan is a special month. Those who go to shul every day, you don't say Tachanun, they like that. It's the month of Nisan. It's the month that, just like the month of Adar, we say at the Purim and the Megillah, the month that was transferred, Me'yagon l'Simcha, Me'evel l'Yom Tov. So too, maybe it doesn't really matter when it's convenient. If it's your accountant, it's tax season, so you can work around have the Pesach Seder sometime during the month when it might be convenient. And the Haggadah says that's a legitimate question. And the Haggadah says, no, you can't do that. Why not? So they says, Bayamahu, that, okay, I can start early. Like, we bring in Shabbos early. No. It's got to be the Shashesh Matzah Maru Munachim Lefanecha. The Haggadah is the pedagogical education par excellence. We need audio-visual support. You're right. In theory, you really could do Pesach all month. But since you only have to eat matzah on the 15th at night, so in Mara, that's the only time. So that's when you have to do the Haggadah. Okay, it's very interesting. Then we move to sort of a whole new opening of the Seder. That's how the Gemara actually describes it. The Gemara says there's a debate. How do we tell the story? We start Avadim Hayinu. Where do we start the story from? We were slaves in Egypt. It's a good place. Or Rav and Shmuel argue about this. No. We got to go back a little further in time. And we also have to focus not so much that we were physical slaves. We were spiritually distant from God. And we came closer to God. So it's sort of a new version of the God. We do both. So now we begin Mitchila of the Avodah Zarah Yovatenu. Originally, at the beginning, our forefathers worshipped idols. So I always like to ask people, which one of our forefathers worshipped idols? Avotenu. So in the Haggadah, it talks about Terach. Terach worshipped idols. And they quote a pasuk in Yoshua where it says that. But of course, Terach isn't really one of Avotenu. He's not one of our forefathers. The simple answer is Avram. Avram worshipped idols. And he grew up in Terach's home. According to the Midrash, Terach had an idol store. So obviously Avram was taught that way. And I've mentioned in other contexts, that's probably why Abraham came to recognize God. I know it sounds a little radical, but he was exposed to religion in a way that didn't make sense to him. So, but because he was exposed to Avodah Zarah, which means Avodah, worship of God, Zarah, it's foreign. So Avram, luckily, he removed the Zarah, but he did Avodah. So that's the simple meaning. I think we worshipped idols originally. Nothing wrong. We grew from that. And we mentioned again in other occasions, Avodah Zarah is something positive. This yearning for God, there's something positive in that idea. It's also interesting. We talked about Terach. Terach went the father of Nachor, father of Avram. Interesting how Haran isn't mentioned. If you look in the Chumash, Terach is really not a bad guy at all. Not only is he not a bad guy, Terach's a great guy. We know very little about Terach. The 9 generations preceding him all had one kid, right? The Torah always lists from Adam to Noah, from Noah to Avram, always this one kid that they had. Or this one had this child, Obviously, they had many more children. But only when they come to Noah, you list his 3 children. And then when you come to Terach, they listed his 3 children. And then the Torah tells us that Terach wanted to move to Israel. Apparently, Terach had some notion that Eretz Canaan was a special land, that God didn't tell him nothing. He starts moving to Israel. For some reason, he aborts the mission. And basically, the Torah picks up that God says to Abraham, you have to follow the path of your father. Your father tried to get to Israel. He didn't make it. You'll make it. So there's really something quite fascinating about this whole chapter. But Terach was, as the Haggadah is emphasizing, as Yeshua emphasized, Terach and Avram too, to a certain extent, was Obed Avodah Zarah. But now, Baruch Hashem, now thank God, now we're close. We have the ability and the desire, hopefully, to come and worship God, and come to do Avodah without the Zarah. But for the Jewish people, it was a long journey. Esav, as the paragraph continues, Esav got Har Seir, and L'Reshet Oto, he inherited his property immediately. V'Yaakov banav yardu Mitzrayim. But Jacob and his children went down to Egypt, be many hundreds of years before the promise made to Avram, before the Jewish people would begin their mission. We have a long, often, unfortunately, tortured history. 1 step forward, 1 step backwards, 2 steps forward. Okay, so we went down to Egypt. Maybe that's the end. Maybe it would be finished. No, Baruch Shomer Havtachto Yisrael. Thank you, God, who keeps the promises to Israel. God is wonderful. HaKadosh Baruch Hu chishev et it's sort of a slightly difficult expression. He calculated when the end has to be. Like we sort of alluded to before, had the Jews stayed in Egypt any longer, it may have been past the point of no return. So God calculated the time we should be there, which our sages understood, the lowering the time from 400 years to 210, but whatever it might mean. It says, as Avram says, you'll be a slave for 400 years. They don't continue, but presumably what they mean 400, but the way the sages calculated it, we were only there for 210 years. Of course, I was always bothered by the question. That's very nice. God, you keep your promises. You took us out of Egypt. But you know what? You put us in Egypt. Don't do me any favors. You go and you break somebody's arm and then you fix it. You don't thank the guy because he fixed your arm. You are upset at them for breaking it in the first place. Right? So thank you very much, God. You're great. You promised you'd take us out of Egypt. You even let us in Egypt early. Yeah, but you promised we'd go to Egypt. Leave us alone. We don't need Egypt. We don't need freedom. But of course, as we sort of mentioned, Egypt was necessary for the development of the Jewish people. Yeah, it wasn't easy, but we had no choice. We had to grow in Egypt, and it was necessary. We didn't like it, but it was for our good. And let's add another couple, because we mentioned already slavery and business practices. There's also what we say on Yom Kippur. We read in Achremot, but of course our sages decided to make this the Yom Kippur reading in the afternoon. Do not be like the Egyptians. Do not do like they did. And to list off a whole host of sexual sins. The sexual depravity of the Egyptians, that also is something we have to learn not to do. But I think there's a more fundamental idea here. Why do we have to be slaves in Egypt? Or let's say why specifically in Egypt? Egypt, of course, was the most advanced country in the world. It was the superpower of the world. For a long, long time, we still today, people are enthralled by Egypt and the mummies and pharaohs. It's fascinating. Egyptian history. Egypt was a wonderful place in so many eras. And the Jewish people had to see that greatness. We had to see what the greatest science and technology and architecture, bread making, was invented in Egypt. They refined bread making. It's another, you think of Pesach and Chametz, there's a whole new motif how to understand it. Once you understand Egypt and bread, that's why Paro had a baker and a butler. Bread was very special in the Egyptian culture. That's why they wouldn't eat bread with the Hebrews. Bread is special. We can't have that with the Hebrews. But Egypt had many wonderful things. And God didn't want the Jewish people growing up in a hick town. We had to see greatness. So we could learn from this greatness. At the same time, we had to learn that greatness and in technology and science and wisdom, unfortunately, does not correspond to greatness in morality. To see that, and we can see perhaps because the greatness we all witnessed this we all know about it. Some witnessed it in the 20th century. How great cultures can be the lowest of the low. So that was a very important lesson, and Jewish people had developed on both angles to see the greatness of Egypt and the lowliness of Egypt, to know what we can take and what we cannot take. So we thank God. We thank God that He kept His promise, not just that He took us out of Egypt, that He sent us down to Egypt. Maybe it's easy for those who didn't go to Egypt to say, I don't think the people there, the stage, they would be happy not to have done that. But from a Jewish historical perspective, we're thanking God for being slaves and for taking us out. That's what I think it means. Okay. Unfortunately, I don't think we have to say much today in the post-October 7th world, that in every generation, people are aroused to destroy us. It's actually, it's a depressing thought. It's very depressing. But somehow, we hold up the cup of wine. Like, despite it all, we're here. We have survived. But Kadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyadam. That Kadosh Baruch Hu saves us. I don't know that that's an easy statement for people to say. I wouldn't expect a Holocaust survivor to say something like that. Just like the Gemara says that the Anshe Knesset Agdola restored the Amidah to El Hagadol Giborban Arak as Yirmiyahu and Daniel, had taken out Gadol v'Nara, or Gibor v'Nara, I believe. They took out two of those phrases. Just, you can't say God is great and awesome. The temple is destroyed. Non-Jews are persecuting Jews. They couldn't say it. And the Gemara says, how could they not say it? Moshe Rabbeinu used those terms. Hail Gadol Gibor v'Nara in Parshat Ekev. How could he not say it? They knew God is a God of truth, and for them, they didn't experience it. I think that's very powerful Talmud, piece of Talmud, Yuma 69b, I believe it is. And it's the same thing here. I think somebody who may have gone through the Holocaust may not be able to say, V'akadosh Baruch Hu matzilein miyadam. But the fact that we have a thriving state of Israel despite October 7th, and the fact that the Jewish people are still here, so we do lift up our cup of wine and say, despite the enemies, look at the amazing contributions the Jewish people have. And that's what I said earlier, people who identify as Jews despite it all. And, one of the sort of, I don't want to call it positive, but people talk about it. Jews have realized that they have to identify more as Jews. The world is a tough place, and Jews who thought they could assimilate realize it's not so simple. Anyway, that's so we lift up the cup of wine and we celebrate the survival, not just the survival, the thriving of the Jewish people in so many areas, in so many countries, and in so many ways. All right, stay Omad, go out and learn. Now we have I wouldn't say a new version, we're going to now focus on a story from an analysis of the biblical text. It's the most intellectual part of the Seder, so to speak. It's also, by this time it's getting late, especially after daylight savings time, and people are in a hurry. It's not quite as exciting as the other parts of the Haggadah, but in many ways, this is actually the real mitzvah of a Haggadah Mincha. When the Gemara describing, you have to tell your children. So you can tell the story really anyway, but the Gemara says the way our sages have determined we should tell the story is not from Parshat Bo or Va'era, like I said, because we're not telling history. We're just describing the lessons of history. So we tell the story now from the perspective of a farmer, 1,000 years later, living in the land of Israel, and he brings his bikurim. He brings his first fruit, one of the beautiful mitzvot of the Torah, to Jerusalem, and he thanks God. He acknowledges the blessings of the land, and he understands the historical connection. We're not living in Hebrew-speaking Portugal, but this is a special land, so the farmer brings the fruit, and he has to make a declaration. 6 verses, 4 of those verses are said in the Haggadah. Soloveitchik surmises that it could be originally, we said all 6. They talk about now we're in the land of Israel, which, when we're exiled, that wasn't true. So they had to take it out of the Haggadah. But it's a really 4-verse synopsis of the story beginning at Yaakov Avinu, beginning with Lavan, Yaakov and Lavan. And very quickly, we went to Egypt, they oppressed us, we got out, and here we are. And then we analyzed these 4 verses, verse by verse, and the Gemara makes, or the Haggadah makes sort of an analysis, either brings a proof text or says what it means, etc. We're not going to go through all of it, but just we'll point out a few ideas. But first of all, say omad. It's a very interesting expression. Go out and learn. So I think often, if you want to learn, you have to go out. What does it mean you have to go out? You have to go beyond your comfort zone. If you want to really be a chacham, and that's at the Seder, we all want to be a chacham. We want to be a chacham. That's how Lomeid Mikol Adam. We learn from everybody. That's a lot easier said than done. People, especially in the world today, people live in echo chambers. They're not interested what anybody else has to say. Have to go out of where you are holding and see what other people have to say. Say omad. Go out and learn. Okay, that's just important. We're all learning. Then we say, what are we going to go out and learn? Well, if I'm telling the Pesach story, I would not begin at Lavan. I mean, who in the world would begin the story with Lavan? With Pesach, right? The story begins. Now God is making this claim now from Lavan the Aramean, who look what he wanted to do to Yaakov. Paro, he only wanted to kill the men. Lavan wanted to kill everybody. This often, I think, I hope that this sort of, it bothers you a little bit. First of all, where do we see Lavan wanted to kill Yaakov? It's not true. Of course, B, Is it really true that Lavan was worse than Paro? Is it really possible that Lavan was worse than Paro? Very hard to accept. So again, it could be an exaggeration. Very possible. I know people don't like that idea, but it could very well be. They want to emphasize he was really, really terrible. But I think it probably, of course, is more than that. And it's interesting, even though they're comparing him to Paro, who was literally killing the males, that's what we're assuming. He said, let's kill the men. Lavan bikesh la'akor, to uproot. Uproot is not exactly the same thing. Lavan, and maybe not even consciously, Lavan wanted to make the Jewish people assimilate into, become part of his family and be lost to the Jewish people. So when we say Lavan bikesh la'akor takol, it doesn't necessarily mean he wanted to kill, and it doesn't mean that, and it doesn't even mean he was worse than Paro. He wasn't. But it means he was, in a sense, almost more effective than Paro, even if unwittingly, because had Yaakov stayed the same way had those Jews who stayed in Egypt were lost. Had Yaakov stayed in the house of Lavan any longer, he too would have been lost. In many ways, the story of Yaakov and Lavan is the precursor to the story of the Jewish people in Egypt, the exile, and they multiply many people very quickly. There's a lot of parallels. And it could even be that Yaakov thought that the idea of going down to a foreign land, this had already occurred with him. But anyways, that's how we begin. That Lavan was a really, really bad guy. And then we went to Egypt. It's also a little bit strange. Arameo. So the truth of the matter, in the text of the Chumash, most of the commentaries and don't interpret this as Lavan. Here, the Haggadah is interpreting an Aramean wanted to destroy my father, and he went down to Egypt. He went down to Egypt much, much later. It's not like he didn't escape from Lavan to Egypt. He went back home. He left Lavan and he went back to Israel. And only many years later, the whole Yosef saga does he go down to Egypt. Nonetheless, I got links to two, that this was the beginning of the process, so to speak. And we went down to Egypt. That's the beginning of the story. We were forced. So was Yaakov forced to go to Egypt? Okay, so that Yaakov was forced to aid the famine, and in a certain way he was forced if he wanted to see his beloved son, Yosef. But what's interesting is the next line, Vayagar Sham. He lived there, or he sojourned there. Vayagar is a ger, a stranger. Melamed, it teaches Yaakov didn't want to live in Egypt. This was it. He was going for a weekend visit, see his son, give him a big hug and kiss, get some food and come back. Right? That's what it sounds like. He didn't want to go back. Let's go. Right? Okay, we don't have any food, but I'm going to go back. But it's clear that Yaakov Avinu had a premonition that he wasn't coming back anytime soon. And that's why he was afraid to go to Egypt, which is kind of astounding considering his son is there. And God has to tell him, don't be afraid to go to Egypt. What's he afraid? He's afraid. One of the things he's probably afraid of is that's it. He knows he's not coming back. But anyways, theoretically, Yaakov would have liked to come back. It just did not work out. We went down, so here, the first verse, we went down few in numbers, 70 people, and we grew, we became mitsuyanim, we became exceptional there. But Himalaya Aretzotam, everywhere you went, the Jewish people were there, they're becoming great, creating jealousy among the Egyptians. Now we move on to the second of the four verses that we're going to say as part of the story of the Exodus from the perspective of the farmer. Vayareo Tano Hamitrim, and the Egyptians were mean to us. They were bad for us. Vayanunu, they oppressed us. Vayiknu aleinu avodah kasha, they gave us very hard work. It's interesting. Vayareu also, I believe, can be read, and the notion of vahafta l'reacha can be a friend. And sometimes, or enemies, sometimes, at least from a Jewish perspective, yes, they do terrible things for us, but also they can be very friendly for us and make us assimilate, even if they don't mean it. But it can, Vayareu Tanu Hamitrim could imply this notion that life was so good as we described for some people, it was, that they lost their Jewish identity. You might also explain it that Vayareu Otanu, the Egyptians caused us to come close together. We know, and we see this unfortunately after October 7th, when people are attacked, when the Jewish people are attacked, that brings us more brings us together, more unified. So through the Egyptians' oppression of us, we came together. But the simple meaning is, and that's how the Haggadah interprets it, that the Egyptians were mean to us. Vayiknu aleinu avodah kasha. They gave us very hard work. So the Mishnah, the Haggadah quotes, what does that mean? Vayavidu mitzrayim b'nei shel beparach. The parach, which also, by the way, so some people point out perach, a soft tongue, perach. They're very soft and sweet to us. Be nice, be a loyal Egyptian, build the cities for us. They didn't necessarily, I think, the simple pshat is they made us work like crazy, like it described. But there's also this notion that the rabbis want to throw in that the Jews were loyal. That's probably how they started working. Hava nichak malo. How, let's be wise. How are we going to get the Jews to be slaves? We can't just turn them into slaves. We're going to ask them to volunteer, and one thing led to another. But the avodat parach is basically defined in Jewish law as work that has no value. People can work really, really hard, and it's fine. They don't mind. If you're working for a purpose, people who start their own business, or they're working for somebody else, they're working for the Jewish community, or for whatever they're working for, something they believe in, and they're willing to work very, very hard. It's not avodah parach. It may be avodah kasha, but it may be hard work, but it's okay. But when you feel you're working for no purpose, that's a terrible thing, and that's what the Egyptians did. That's what the master does. That's unfortunately sometimes what employers do to employees. They make them do useless work, and sometimes if the employee picks up on it, it's very depressing, very degrading, and that is a form of slavery that comes from Paro and the Egyptians. Moving on to the next verse, we cried out to God, "Vanitzak el Hashem." And God heard our cries, and he answered us, and he saw the difficulty. It doesn't say, well, we cried out to God, just crying out to God. A slave, or Soloveitchik talks about this, a slave doesn't know how to speak. People, from the Holocaust often didn't speak they never spoke for 50 years. After the war, they never spoke about it. You lose the ability to talk. They can cry, even that's sometimes hard. They sometimes lose the ability to cry. But we cried out to God, the Jewish people cried out, and it doesn't matter. God understood our cries, and the process of redemption was set in motion. So God saw our suffering. So it's interesting. The Haggadah mentions Vayar Anyenu. He saw our pain and suffering. Zu prishut derech eretz. This refers to the separation of the husbands and the wives. The Egyptians didn't want us having any children. And this is, I would say, a third idea that we have to learn from our sojourn in Egypt, not to be like the Egyptians. We discussed the way they treat strangers, the way they conduct their business practices. And I'd say a third element is the sexual ethic. And that, of course, is the reading of Yom Kippur afternoon. This is what our sages chose to read on Mincha of Yom Kippur. The Torah begins, do not do, Kamasei Eretz Mitzrayim, do not do like the Egyptians. And then the Torah lists off a whole bunch of sexual sins. So, Prishut Derech Eretz, this is part of the culture of Egypt. They wanted to separate the Jews from each other, and unsuccessfully, of course. And we multiplied greatly. But one of the things we're to learn from Egypt is to shy away from the sexual practices that they had. The fourth verse that we're going to quote is that God took us out of Egypt. With a strong hand, with fear, thunder, lightning. Wow, it was quite an impressive event. And the Mishnah, the Haggadah goes on and on and on. God took us out not through an angel, not through a seraph, not through a messenger. Nobody. HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'kvodo u'ba'atzmo. God himself, nobody helped God take us out. I don't want to say that what I think we're all thinking, but that just isn't true. What do you mean, lo ayidei shaliach? God didn't have a messenger. It's okay. Obviously, Moshe was the messenger. Moshe and Aaron were the messengers of God. But the Haggadah totally ignores this, because the Haggadah is not interested in being a historical book necessarily. The Haggadah is emphasizing, obviously it's an exaggeration, and everybody who's reading the Haggadah knows that Moshe Rabbeinu helped God. He was God's messenger to take us out. But the idea, of course, on Pesach is to focus on God. And that's we're going to come up to the Eser Makot, the 10 plagues. It's not only for the Egyptians to be punished and to understand there's a God. Paro said, I don't know this God. And God said, you'll know me pretty soon. It was also for the Jewish people to know God. So we overemphasize God's role. And it's really, it's such a powerful statement, Lo de malach, lo de saraf, Kadosh Baruch Hu before the batzmo. And as you understand, it's a poetic form of stressing the centrality of God. And of course, Moshe, God called everything to do it. Of course, it's God behind the scenes, but of course, Moshe, of course, is the partner, but his place is not to be mentioned in the Haggadah. In the Torah, we mention him all over the place, of course. So this pasuk, the Haggadah goes on for a while, Haggadah Kasad, and then we come, as I mentioned, to the Eser Makot. And of course, we have a custom to take off a cup of wine. This is, I would say, a tension we have here, and we'll see it, or I guess the tension, let's say, between here and after the meal, when we welcome Eliyahu, when we say Shvach Hamatcha, God should get really angry and take out his vengeance on the nations. And yet here we do, most famous reason, we take out the wine, because we're sorry. We have to bemoan the fact that the Egyptians had to suffer. They're also created in the image of God. Well-known midrash, God got angry at the angels who were singing and praising God. Masayat, told me, but yeah, my creations are drowning in the sea, and you're singing. God got angry at the angels. God did not get angry at the Jewish people for singing as Yashir. We who suffered at the hands of the Egyptians had the right to sing, but not the angels. They didn't suffer. They had no right to sing. Nonetheless, we're sorry that it had to come to this. So we dip out the 10 cups of wine. We should not rejoice. We should feel the pain even of our enemies. And yet, at the same time, we sometimes pray to God to take out his vengeance on our enemies. And of course, it's situational. Depends many factors, and it's a tension we have to live with, and we have nowadays. What should be our attitude towards those who want to destroy us? We don't want to be like them. But so as we say the Eser Makot, the punishment of the Egyptians, we take away one of the cups of wine. We take away a drop of wine. And as mentioned, the 10 plagues were also important for the Jewish people, perhaps even more important on a certain level than for the Egyptians. And then we get to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda notated by him Simanim. He gave a mnemonic device. The Tzach Adash Ba'achav. And all the commentators wonder, like, what's he saying? So some actually say, yeah, it's a mnemonic device. There was no printing press, If you want to remember the 10 plagues, it's hard. We have this in the Gemara very often. You learn Gemara, we have these little phrases, they just say little letters, that. So that is how some people actually explain it very simply. We know that the Eser Makot are divided into groups of three. The first three, the middle three, the last three from below the ground, from the heavens. The first two of each three where there was warning, but plagues 3, 6, and 9 had no warnings. There is a division of 3, 3, and 3, and then of course 10 is separate. Although Rabbi Yehuda, interestingly enough, puts the 10th one, Ba'achav, he groups it with the 9th one. It's very interesting. But anyways, that's our custom. That we say the Eser Makot, and then we add sort of the three more grouped them 3, 3, and 4. And then we get to Dayenu, one of the favorite highlights of the Haggadah, And what does Dayenu mean? It's enough. What's enough? It would have been enough had God taken us out of Egypt and let us die in the desert. That's what the Jewish people complained about, right? So what it means is that each one of these steps we have to thank God for. You have to thank God for each one of, and there are 15 steps, just like there are 15 parts to the Seder, and there were 15 steps in the Beit HaMikdash from the men's to the women's sections. So it's where number 15 comes in. But we thank God for these 15, gifts, we can say, gave to the Jewish people. We should show our gratitude for every part of the process. Just to point out a couple interesting things. So it says, the classic question everybody asks, Eli Karadlu Har Sinai. If God would have brought us to Mount Sinai, but not given us Torah, it would have been enough. So even if we want to interpret it, that it would have been enough, not that it would have been enough to say thank you, it would have really been enough. What do you mean it would have been enough? What's the point of going to Mount Sinai if you don't get the Torah? So the answer is there is a point. The preparation is often more important than the event itself. How you prepare for something. We just had the eclipse the other day, and everybody's preparing. I think that was great until the event. It was very cloudy. But be that as it may, but when the Jewish people approached Har Sinai, they became a united people. It says they stood as one. Preparing for Torah was worth it, even if the process would not have continued. You want to interpret this idea, things, we're happy for what we had, even if we don't have that conclusion. I think it's very fascinating idea. Ilu natan lanu et haShabbat. If God would have given us the Shabbat, but He wouldn't have taken us to Har Sinai. Um, um, and He would have taken us to Har Sinai, that would have been enough. In other words, Shabbat has value even divorced from religious law. The Shabbat is a beautiful day for us. The concept of Shabbat is something the Jewish people brought to the world. So I think that we can, if I want to put a modern twist on Dayenu, even a Jew who's an atheist, who doesn't religious, whatever you want to call them, keep Shabbat, because it's a beautiful day for the family to come together as a community. And there's so many positives. Of course, we keep it as part of the Ten Commandments, a part of our Sinai. But here in Dayenu, we divide it. It would have been enough to have Shabbos without the law of Shabbat. We'd have to make it on our own. And if I want to say something, take that another step further, the last one, Ilu, or towards the end, where it says, Ilu natan lanu et Torah, v'lo hiknisanu l'Eretz Yisrael. If God would have given us the Torah, not taking us to the land of Israel. So wait till I finish the whole sentence. But in other words, the Jewish people can and have existed without the land of Israel. We can exist without the land of Israel, but we can't exist without Torah. So it would have been enough, so to speak, if we had Torah and we not come into Israel. At the same time, and this we do see, it's enough to come to Israel even if we don't have the Beit HaBchira. Right? Some people say, what are we thankful for Israel for? It's so far from the ideal, and of course we don't have a temple yet. That doesn't matter. Yisrael. The fact that we enter the land of Israel and we have a Jewish state, Dayenu. Of course, the goal is to get to Beit HaBchira, and that's how, after we say all these 15 things, we say it all happened. That how much more so do we have to thank God for he did take us out of Egypt, he did do miracles, he did give us Shabbat, he did take us to Har Sinai, etc., etc. And then we had Ubana Lanu and Beit HaBchira. He built for us. It's also very strange when he built for us, but okay, he allowed us to build. He built for us the Beit HaBchira. Why do we have this Beit HaBchira? So the assumption is the Beit HaBchira is the Beit HaMikdash, the place that God chose where to dwell His name. That's His special abode. Why? To atone for all our sins. So that's very interesting. If you'd ask me, what's the purpose of the Beit HaMikdash? Yes, your typical Jew probably. Let's say korbanot. So I don't. That's not the approach I take. I like to focus on what Yeshayahu says, that Ki beiti beit tefillah yikarei l'chol amim. The Beit HaMikdash is primarily a house of prayer, but not only for Jews, for all people. The Beit HaMikdash is the place where all people can come. V'nemar vayashem l'melech al kol haaretz. God will be recognized by everybody. It's such a beautiful concept from Yeshayahu. Ki beit tefillah yikarei l'chol hamim, that everybody comes. Adam ki yakri mikem korban. Everybody is welcome to bring the sacrifices. That's I would say, the major purpose. It's very interesting. In the Mishnah, the temple has an additional purpose, obviously, because in the context of Elam Mitziyot, of returning lost objects. But the Mishnah was the biggest lost and found. That's where people lost things, they would gather together. I think that's also a beautiful idea. The Beit HaMikdash brings people together. So the biggest lost and found for the Jewish people was in the Beit HaMikdash, and that actually impacted on the laws. How long do you have to keep a lost object for before you can claim it? It had to do with people coming to the Beit HaMikdash, and they, everybody comes. So if they didn't come and nobody claimed it, you can keep it for yourself. But it's interesting. I saw some of the commentators point out. So the Beit HaMikdash is the atonement, of course, we would think of the sacrifices, but we notice we use the term here Beit HaBchira, the place that God chooses. We don't say the Beit HaMikdash or the Mishkan. So some point out that the Beit HaBchira is the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies. I just found this interesting. And of course, the Holy of Holies is the place for atonement, the place where only the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, enters on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So that would make a lot of sense, that the purpose of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies, is to bring atonement. But the purpose of the Beit HaMikdash is to bring people, to bring Jews together 3 times a year, ideally, and to bring the world together, that everybody should come together and unite and recognize God. That's the purpose of Pesach, to recognize this, to put this into motion. Okay, Rabban Gamliel, hi Omer. Now we missed Rabban Gamliel and Bnei Brak. He was, as we discussed, was missing from that story, but we pick up with him. If you don't say these 3 things, you did not fulfill your obligation. Pesach, Matzah, Maror. So it's interesting. There's a debate. I would say both are true. What obligation didn't you fulfill? So I would say in the context of that Haggadah, the simple meaning is you didn't fulfill the obligation of telling the story. He got it. We're in Makit now. You must tell the story. So you can't tell the story if you don't talk about the Paschal Lamb, even though we don't have it anymore, and matzah and maror. Of course, we're going to then eat the matzah and the maror. But some interpret you don't fulfill the mitzvah Pesach, matzah, maror if you don't talk about them. In other words, I want to eat matzah, but if I don't say why I'm eating matzah, it's not really enough. If I don't say why I'm eating maror, if I don't say why we should have the korban Pesach, not enough. So it's either the obligation of the mitzvah itself or the obligation of telling the story. And of course, it's I would say it's a little bit of both. So we start with the Pesach, which was the central focus. It's Pesach is of the 248, which we assume 248 positive mitzvot. Only 2 of them carry the punishment of karet, being cut off from the community. That's what karet means. You excluded yourself, like the Russia. You've excluded yourself from the community, and that's Brit Milah and Korban Pesach. And of course, a person who doesn't have a Brit Milah cannot partake. A male who doesn't have Brit Milah cannot partake in the Korban Pesach. But the Korban Pesach, of course, was the primary mitzvah of the Seder night when the temple stood. And the Rabban Gamliel quotes the verse that in the Torah and the Haggadah is the answer to the Rasha, right? That Mahavodah Zot Lachem, what is this service unto you, or this work, or this burden, and the way they're interpreting the Rasha. So the answer of the Torah, which of course there the word means service, is you should say Zevach Pesach, it's a sacrifice unto God, who quote unquote passed over our homes. And of course later on, I mean, just this our home puts a mezuzah. I mean, if you want to think of it that way, every time you walk into your house, the mezuzah is a reminder of Pesach. Then we talk about matzah, why we eat matzah. So it's interesting. Everybody knows, every 3-year-old kid knows we eat matzah because we left Egypt in a hurry. When you study the Chumash, it's not so clear. The command to eat matzah was given 2 weeks before they left. Seems to be a little bit independent. Even if we hadn't left Egypt in a hurry, we might have had to eat matzah. And of course, earlier in the Haggadah, we say halachmanya, we ate matzah because it's the food of slaves. But of course, Rabban Gamliel here is talking about matzah as the food of freedom. As we became free, we ate matzah. And that's what he's going to focus on. Even though matzah is a slave food, in the context of the Haggadah, we can elevate that slave food into the food of freedom for the most elaborate meal of the year. And then, of course, maror, maror, which today we assume is only a rabbinic mitzvah, because of remind ourselves the bitterness, of course, of the our journey, our stay in Egypt. Then the Mishnah says perhaps the most difficult part of the Haggadah, or at least to put in practice, b'chol dor v'dor, Every generation, we have to see ourselves as if we have left Egypt. So the simple meaning is, yeah, you have to try to feel what it's like to be a slave. That's eating the maror, and to appreciate our freedom. But of course, it's very difficult. That's very difficult. I think it can also mean that every generation has its own Egypt, its own challenges. Every generation of things we're enslaved to. People are enslaved to money, to honor, to power, all kinds of things. So everybody has to leave their own Egypt. The word Mitzrayim comes from the word sar, narrow, the confines of life. So I think what it's saying, in every generation, we have to leave Egypt. Of course, in the context, it's referring to 3,500 years ago. But of course, the Torah is really a book of current events. It's not what happened to our ancestors is not so pressing for us. It's really what the message is for us, right? And that we have to deal with. That's everything in the Torah. Everything in the Torah is written. The rabbis tell us there were millions of prophets, but only 55 of them get written down, because only 55 of them are relevant for our time. Torah is not a history book. We're not telling the story, as I mentioned, to tell the story. We're telling the story for the present and for the future. But and then the Haggadah quotes, "We got to tell the bincha." You have to, every generation, you have to feel as if you left Egypt. You have to tell your children. That's along the lines of what I was saying, I believe. And every generation, you have to make the story relevant. I mentioned on other occasions the Meshach Chochmah, Rav Meir Simcha of Devinsk, who passed away in 1926, I believe. One of the great, thinkers. Both he wrote a commentary on the Rambam, but wrote a commentary on the Chumash. Notes that every generation has mitzvot that take on greater historical importance. And every generation has their challenges, and certain mitzvot, well, they apply at all times. In some generations, certain mitzvot are more important. He says that in reference to the Jews leaving Egypt, who the Midrash tries to know on what merit, and they give all these, different answers. We didn't change our name, our language, our dress. We didn't do this. We didn't do that. Things that aren't even so important. There's no mitzvah in the Torah, the names, dress, Hebrew, to speak different languages. But yet, at that time in Egypt, that's what kept Jewish identity. It wasn't about mitzvah. Sometimes a person who has a Magen David around their neck, that keeps them Jewish. For them, that's as important as any other mitzvah that can be. And every generation has their mitzvot that take on added importance. Obviously, in our generation, settling the land of Israel has taken on much greater importance, and it's the wise parent and the wise leaders of the generation who can recognize what the needs of the hour are. And that's Vigadat Bincha. You have to tell your children so they can appreciate the story and want to be part of the great story of the Jewish people. And then we move from here. Oh, we've left Egypt, Pesach, Matzah, and we have to remember the Maror. Lahodot, Lahalel, L'Shabeach, Lefer, L'Romeim, they're beautiful, all these different forms of praise to God. He took us out from slavery to freedom, Miyakon Simcha to joy, to Yom Tovim, Me'afelu L'Or Gadol to a great light. And now we're going to sing. We're going to sing Shirach Hadashah, a new song. That same idea. It may be the same words, but it's got to have new meaning. Just like great poetry. That's what the Torah is, a book of poetry. Hallel, of course, Tehillim is a book of poetry. Great poetry, the words remain the same, but the meaning can change in every generation. So we have to sing a Shirach Hadashah, making it relevant, and then we say Hallel. Of course, we split Hallel into two, and we don't say a bracha on Hallel. And the reason we don't say a bracha, and this is really the only time of the year we say Hallel at night, I guess, unless for those people who say Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut at night. But traditionally, up until at least 1967 or 48, the only time we ever said Hallel at night was on Pesach night. And the reason is because it's a very different Hallel. Normally, we see Hallel in the morning, Pesach morning, or on Sukkot, on Hanukkah. We're saying Hallel to remember the events, to thank God for what happened. When we say Hallel at the Seder, we're saying Hallel because we're reliving the experience. We've just said everybody's got to try to relive the experience. We're leaving Egypt. A bracha means you prepare. I know what I'm going to do in advance. I have to prepare and make a bracha. When you live through an event, you don't make the bracha at the time. It's in retrospective. You can make the bracha. So it's like an immediate response to leaving Egypt. We sing to God. Of course, we'll say "B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim," and that's the most of it. That doesn't talk really about Egypt in a specific way, but of course, after we say "B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim" and the Malach HaHayam and the whole change of nature, everything that changed with the Jewish people leaving, then we stop and we eat a meal. And then we're going to say Hallel the rest because the meal is part of the Hallel too. The meal becomes part of the way we praise God. And that's, of course, a beautiful Jewish idea. We know all special events, we have to have a meal at a bris, at a wedding, a bar mitzvah. That's how we celebrate by turning food into a mechanism. It's part of to worship God, that our physical and spiritual beings can come together. So the meal at the Seder night especially becomes part of the praises of Hallel. Just to point out one thing, because I guess a pet peeve, I don't know how much matzah you eat at the Seder, but I know you have to eat the size of an olive. Maybe you have to eat more than one olive. We don't get into all the details, but it's interesting. Chaim Soloveitchik's, seminal article about how the rupture and reconstruction, how the changes in the Jewish world and the traditional world in the second half of the 20th century, and he uses the Kazite as the example, how the size keeps growing. The idea is that you eat a normal amount of matzah and a normal amount of maror and a normal amount of time. And it's interesting. Obviously, we live in a scientific, generation. We don't even have to eat an olive. It's like an olive, kizai, because 2,000 years ago, people weren't so concerned. An inch here, an inch there, an ounce there. What difference did it make? You have to eat like around the size of an olive. Today, everything has to be so exacting. But should just eat normal, and they're supposed to enjoy the meal. Shulchan Aruch, that's part of the Seder, and an important part of the Seder. And of course, during the temple times, it was the highlight point of the Seder. We eat the meal, and then, of course, we have safun. We eat the afikomen, and different customs. In our family, the custom was that the kids used to hide the afikomen, and my father, Leva Shalom, had to go find it. It wasn't so successful usually, but that's that's a nice game we always like to play, and of course, that's part of the. I think this custom developed to keep the interest of the children alive, which of course is a major theme. We haven't really spoken about that much. We're talking about to teach our children, but it's very important to keep the interest of the children. I remember last year we were talking to somebody at Yeshiva University who's in charge of training rabbis. And this is my class, actually, that I'm teaching. They were interviewing him. And they asked him, what's the most important role? What's the most important you look for in a rabbi? And I found this answer to be fascinating. He says, the most important thing of a rabbi is he not be boring. If a rabbi is boring, so people are going to think that Judaism is boring. So there is something to be exciting, to keep the interest of children, keep the interest of adults. I think often it is that, listen, life, sometimes there are boring aspects of life, but the idea that Judaism should be exciting and fun. There's nothing wrong with having fun and playing games, and even adults can play games. And we do a lot at the Seder. We give out candies that used to say fun things and play and games and all kinds of things to teach interest. That's what we spoke earlier, that the level of discussion at the Seder has to vary depending on who shows up at the Seder. Obviously, a Seder with little kids is going to be much different than a Seder with adults. The challenge is, of course, in many storm, you have all kinds of people. Okay, so you have to figure out, you have to work hard so everybody can do something of interest. Okay, then Birkat Hamazon, which serves as the third cup of wine, blessing, and then we continue with the rest of Hallel. Usually at this point, it's late, it's after midnight, and people are tired and whatever. But they sing. I hope they go through Hallel. We add the Hallel Hagadol, not just Hallel Hamitzri. The regular Hallel we say is what we call the Egyptian Hallel, and then we have the great Hallel. This is the Hodu Lashem Ki Tov Ki Liolam Chasto that we say every Shabbat. the 26 Kili Olam Chasto, that God's kindness is forever. And this represents the 26 generations from Adam until Moshe Rabbeinu, the 26 generations of pre-Torah, which in a certain sense, the idea that the Torah is the foundational, the blueprint of the world. So the world existed for these 26 generations by the grace of God. We didn't, so to speak, have the merit of the Torah. And we say Nishmat, that is sort of the Hallel, if you want to call it. We say every Shabbat. And then we drink the fourth cup of wine, and then we come to Nirtza. The Seder's over, and we hope it has been accepted, and we pray Chasal Seder Pesach. It's over, but this year, now we're back into the real world. This year, it wasn't exactly as it was meant to be, but we should merit that we can do it together. The Shana Haba Yerushalayim Habnuyah, in a built-up of Jerusalem, with Jerusalem, of course, at peace. That's what it means to be built up. And then we have a number of songs. These are later additions to the Haggadah, and also, keep its interest. Hopefully, keep the interest of the adults. Everybody has their own family tunes, I imagine. I'm pretty sure the family tunes we have, not so many people know, but at least some of them. And just a couple of quick points before we wrap up. It was at midnight. So, night, that's what makes another aspect of Pesach night so special. Night is always associated with fear and uncertainty and, and nervousness. And yet, of course, the idea of the Exodus is the night turned into day. But we mention all the events that, according to our tradition, took place at night, like Achashverosh couldn't sleep at night, all the things that happened, and then we end off by Karav Yom Asher Hu Lo Yom V'Lo Laila. We look forward to the day which will be neither day nor night. In other words, even the night shall be like day. That hope and positive aspect, that we can bring light to the day. It's interesting. I don't think I mentioned this earlier, right? That we talk about Pesach and Matzah. So, Pesach and Matzah are also two holidays. In the Haggadah, we talked about them as two foods, the Korban Pesach and the eating of the Matzah. But in the Torah, there's Chag HaPesach and Chag HaMatzot. And they're on two different days. The Chag HaPesach is on the 14th of Nisan, then we bring the Korban Pesach. And Chag HaMatzot is on the 15th of Nisan. However, they do overlap. They overlap from when the 15th of Nisan, let's say 8 o'clock at night, until the next morning. Why? Because in the temple, the day starts in the morning. It's only outside of the temple. Everybody knows the day starts at night, but that's not true when it comes to the temple. That's why when you bring a sacrifice, say you bring it on Monday afternoon, you can eat it until, let's say for one day, till Tuesday morning. You eat it for the day ends in the morning, not like we normally have it. So you bring the Pesach on the 14th in the day, but that day doesn't end till the next morning, i.e. what we call the 15th at night. So the night of the Seder is the overlap, is the bringing together of the Chag HaPesach and Chag HaMatzot. You have to eat the matzah at night, be'erev tochlu matzot, and you have to eat the Korban Pesach at night, but we sort of combine the day and the night. And the reason for this is because the role of the Jewish people is to bring light to the darkness of the world. The world needs a lot of light. That's the first thing God created. And we come into a world of darkness and we have to bring light. So the day starts at darkness and ends at darkness. But in the temple, which is the dwelling place of God, we start the day when it's light. So we look forward to when day and night, when the night can be turned into the day. We look forward to a wonderful future, night and day being are symbols. Then we talk after who we praise God, kilona, kilo. We sing many of the praises of God. That's what seems the songs, and then we get to Echad Miodea. And this is very interesting. This is really the only we go through it to play a number of games, Shlosh Avot, Arei Mahot, etc. We go, of course, backwards. This is really the only time in the Haggadah that we mention Yosef. Achad Asar Kochvaya. the 11 stars, because we don't want to really talk about Joseph at the Seder, because that's how we got to Egypt in the first place, but in a negative sense. But it's interesting, the 11 stars of his dreams, the 12 tribes, the 13 attributes we go through. We know Judaism places tremendous emphasis on numbers. The number 7, I mentioned it at the Seder. Number 15, of course, at the Seder itself, it's the number 4 that plays a very prominent role. But the number 40 is a number of transformation. 40 days at Mount Sinai, 40 years in the desert, 40 days of the flood, 40 days for a fetus to be formed. So numbers are very important. 13. There are 13 mitai, the 13 attributes of God. And it's not a coincidence that Rabbi Yishmael said there are 13 ways to interpret the Torah. Meaning like sort of the 13 attributes of God and the 13 ways to interpret the Torah. And not surprisingly, the Rambam has 13 principles of faith. So here you just the use of numbers. Here we just mentioned one aspect of each number. And then we end the Seder, Haggadah, one little sheep, a little goat. That's the Jewish people. And everybody eats everybody alive. Unfortunately, one kingdom arises, another kingdom arises, and this one destroys that one. But ultimately, Ata HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will come and slaughter death. Whatever that means exactly, but either in a literal sense, in a figurative sense. We end the Haggadah that with the relationship that God is going to come, and the Jewish people will be redeemed, and through the Jewish people be redeemed, the world can be a world of peace. And I think many people have the custom then to sing again the Shana Haba Yerushalayim. That it's not so much to sing the Shana Haba Yerushalayim, that's very nice, but it's what Yerushalayim represents, the notion of peace. And especially this year, I think the Seder is going to be a little bit different for a lot of people, more difficult or more powerful in many ways. And we pray for the time we should merit the blessings of peace. Thank you very much. I hope that there's some food for thought, and interested to hear your comments. And you should have a wonderful Pesach, a Chag Sameach, a Chag Kasher, and a Chag of peace for all of the Jewish people. We hope you enjoyed A Thought for the Week, a Torah in Motion podcast. You can find more thoughtful Jewish content at TorahInMotion.org. Please rate and review in your favorite podcast app, and send any questions, comments, or critiques to podcast@TorahInMotion.org.